1. There is no later. She didn't leave him, she just stopped waiting. No fight, no goodbye, just a quiet absence that hit louder than any words. He checked his phone, her last message still unread. Can we talk tonight? It was sent 3 months ago. He thought time would stretch, that later was always there, waiting for him. But what if later is just a lie we tell ourselves when we're afraid to show up? He scrolls through their photos, smiles frozen in moments he barely remembers being present for. She had been slowly disappearing right beside him, and he never noticed. Not because he didn't care, but because he believed she would always stay. And that's the cruelest part. No one warns you when the last chance quietly passes. So let me ask you this, how many laters are you still holding onto, thinking they won't run out? If something in this moment feels familiar, subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast. The stories you avoid are often the ones that change you. 2. Small delays that felt harmless. It never looked cruel in the moment. That was the problem. It looked ordinary, reasonable, even harmless. She would ask, softly, "Can we have dinner together tonight?" And he would barely look up before saying, "Not tonight, I've got too much going on." She would nod like she understood. And most of the time, she did, or at least she wanted to. Then it became, "This weekend, okay, and later, after this project is done. Then, next week will be easier." Every delay came wrapped in logic. Every postponed moment sounded temporary. Nothing dramatic, nothing sharp enough to call a wound. But love rarely breaks all at once. Sometimes it thins in quiet places. In the pause before a reply. In the way someone stops repeating a question they used to ask with hope. She still made coffee in the morning. Still folded his shirts. Still smiled when he came home. But the smile began arriving a second too late. Like her heart needed time to catch up with her face. He noticed the change only in fragments. The room felt quieter. Her laughter didn't stay as long. Her eyes no longer searched his the way they used to. And because she wasn't screaming, because she wasn't threatening to leave, he told himself everything was fine. He confused patience with permanence. He mistook her silence for understanding, when really, it was exhaustion. She was not asking for grand gestures. She was asking for presence. A meal without distraction. A conversation that didn't end with, "Can we do this later?" A moment where she didn't have to compete with his deadlines, his stress, his endless need to delay what felt emotionally inconvenient. The tragedy was not that he meant to hurt her. The tragedy was how easy it was for him not to notice that every small postponement was teaching her the same lesson: she could wait. And still not be chosen. 3. The silence starts growing. At first, the silence was so subtle it almost felt imagined. It lived in the spaces between ordinary things. In the car ride home when the music played longer than their voices did. In the kitchen, where she used to fill the room with little stories he barely noticed he was missing now. In bed, where goodnight became shorter, softer, and eventually unnecessary. Nothing had exploded. That was what made it so easy for him to ignore. There were no shattered dishes, no slammed doors, no dramatic tears, just a slow retreat so quiet it could be mistaken for peace. She stopped asking the same questions, not because she stopped caring, but because she was getting tired of offering pieces of herself to someone who kept placing them gently aside. "How was your day?" became, "You must be tired." "Can we talk?" became silence. "Do you miss me?" never got asked at all. And in that silence, something dangerous began to grow: acceptance. Not the healthy kind, the lonely kind, the kind that forms when someone starts adjusting to disappointment so often that it begins to feel normal. He noticed changes, but only as disconnected moments. Her laughter ended too quickly. Her eyes drifted away before his ever met them. She no longer waited by the door when he came home. She no longer reached for his hand without thinking. Her presence was still there, but it had changed temperature. It was no longer warm and reaching. It was careful, measured, already halfway gone in ways he could not yet name. And because the house was still standing, because she was still physically there, he mistook distance for stability. He told himself they were just tired, just busy, just going through a phase. But silence is rarely empty. Sometimes it is crowded with unsent sentences. swallowed hurt, and love trying not to embarrass itself by asking one more time to be seen. By the time he realized the quiet had weight, it was already pressing down on everything between them. 4. He mistook stillness for stability. He told himself that if nothing was breaking, then nothing was broken. That was the illusion he lived inside. The apartment was still quiet. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her toothbrush still rested beside his. She still asked whether he wanted coffee in the morning. Still remembered how he liked his shirts folded. Still moved through their shared space with the same gentle care. To him, those details looked like proof. Proof that she was still there. Proof that whatever distance had entered the room could not be that serious. He believed stability was the absence of chaos. He never stopped to ask whether it might also be the absence of truth. What he called peace was often just unspoken pain with good manners. She was no longer reaching for him the way she used to. No longer interrupting his work to tell him a funny story. No longer asking if they could go somewhere for the weekend or stay up talking a little longer. But because she had stopped protesting, he assumed she had stopped needing. Because she had gone quiet, he assumed she had become secure. He did not understand that some people stop asking not when they feel safe, but when they no longer believe being heard is possible. Stillness can be deceptive like that. It can look clean from the outside, controlled, mature, but inside it, resentment can grow roots. Grief can settle into the furniture. Loneliness can become so familiar that it no longer sounds like sadness, it just sounds like the room. He mistook her restraint for contentment. He mistook her emotional discipline for healing. In truth, she was not becoming more at peace. She was becoming less available, less hopeful, less willing to place her heart in front of someone who only noticed it when it started disappearing. And the cruelest irony was this: the calmer she looked, the more certain he became that he had time. He didn't realize that sometimes the quietest stage of love is not safety. It is the moment just before someone lets go without making a sound. 5. The day she didn't wait. The day she didn't wait looked almost ordinary at first. That was what made it so devastating. There was no storm outside the window. No broken glass. No final screaming match to warn him that something irreversible had already happened. He came home tired, already half inside tomorrow, reaching for his keys with the same distracted rhythm he had used 100 times before. The apartment was quiet, but not the familiar kind. Not the soft quiet of someone reading in the next room. Not the patient quiet that says, "I'm still here." This silence felt finished. At first, he noticed the smallest things. Her shoes were gone from the hallway. The mug she always left near the sink was missing. The lamp on her side of the room wasn't on. He stood there longer than he needed to, as if his body understood something his mind was still refusing to name. Then he opened the closet and saw the empty spaces. Not everything was gone, just enough. Enough to make it clear this was not impulsive, not dramatic, not a threat. She had not left to be chased. She had left because something inside her had already stopped expecting him to come closer. There was no letter on the table. No speech prepared for him to replay later. Just absence, precise, quiet, undeniable, and somehow that hurt more. Because it forced him to face the truth without anything to hide behind. She hadn't left in anger. She had left in exhaustion. In the kind of heartbreak that no longer asks for one last conversation. Because too many chances have already been buried inside silence. He called her name once. Then again, as if sound alone could pull time backward. But the room didn't answer. For the first time, he understood what too late really meant. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was a hallway with no footsteps in it. A home that still looked like theirs, but no longer felt like it. And in that unbearable stillness, he realized the waiting had not ended that day. It had ended long before. He had just arrived too late to notice. 6. He wasn't busy, he was avoiding. For the longest time, he called it being busy. It sounded responsible, productive, even admirable. His calendar was full. His phone never stopped buzzing. And every delay came with a reason that made sense on paper. But if he was honest, really honest, it wasn't time he lacked. It was willingness, not the willingness to work, but the willingness to feel something he didn't know how to handle. He avoided the conversations that didn't have clear outcomes, the moments where she asked, "What do you need from us?" or "Are you happy with me?" Those questions required presence, not solutions, and presence made him uncomfortable. It asked him to slow down, to sit inside emotions he couldn't control, to risk saying something imperfect. So he postponed. Not consciously at first, just small deferrals. "Can we talk later? I'm not in the right headspace. Let me finish this first." Each delay bought him temporary relief, and cost something he couldn't immediately see. Avoidance is quiet like that. It doesn't slam doors, it gently closes them before anything real can enter. It convinces you that you're protecting peace, when you're actually protecting distance. And the more he avoided, the more she adapted. She stopped bringing up the hard things, stopped asking for reassurance, stopped expecting him to show up in ways that required emotional risk. He mistook that adaptation for compatibility, thought they had found a rhythm that worked. But what they really built was a version of love where only one person kept adjusting, where one voice slowly disappeared to keep the other one comfortable. In the end, he wasn't overwhelmed, he was unprepared for closeness. And instead of learning how to stay, he became very good at stepping just far enough away until there was nothing left within reach. 7. This is where you see yourself. This is the part that feels uncomfortably familiar. Not because the story is unique, but because it isn't. Because somewhere in all of this, you can recognize a version of yourself. Maybe not in the big moments, not in the day everything fell apart, but in the small choices that didn't seem important at the time. The times you said, "later," without realizing how often that word was becoming a pattern. The times you chose comfort over connection, silence over honesty, distraction over presence. You told yourself you would show up when things slowed down, when work was lighter, when you felt more ready. But readiness became a moving target. And while you were waiting to become the version of yourself that could love better, someone else was waiting for the version of you that already existed. Maybe you didn't mean to neglect them. Maybe you thought they understood, that they were strong enough, patient enough, secure enough to stay. But strength doesn't mean someone doesn't need to be chosen. Patience doesn't mean someone won't run out of it. And silence doesn't mean everything is okay. It often means something important has stopped being said. This is where it shifts, where the story stops being about him, or her, and starts becoming about you. Because it's easier to see the loss when it's someone else's life. Harder when it reflects your own habits, your own delays, your own ways of avoiding what matters until it becomes something you can no longer reach. So the question isn't just what he lost. It's what you might be slowly losing without noticing. The conversations you keep postponing. The people you assume will still be there. The moments you believe you can come back to later. And if you sit with that long enough, you begin to realize something unsettling. Sometimes the distance doesn't start when someone leaves, it starts when you stop showing up. 8. Time doesn't leave loudly. Time doesn't leave loudly. That is what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't pound on the door before it goes. It doesn't stop in front of you and announce, with perfect clarity, that this is the last ordinary morning, the last distracted dinner, the last time someone you love will ask softly for a version of you that is actually present. Most endings do not arrive like endings. They arrive dressed as routine, as another tired evening, another postponed conversation, another, not now, that feels too small to matter. And that is how people lose things they thought would still be there tomorrow. Not because they never loved, not because they meant harm, but because they confused love with assumption. They thought feeling something deeply was the same as expressing it. They thought staying in the same room was the same as showing up emotionally. They thought there would be one more chance, one more weekend, one more softer moment where everything could finally be said the way it should have been said all along. But life rarely gives warning in a voice loud enough for us to respect it. Sometimes it is just a shift in tone, a message that no longer comes, a chair that stays empty, a silence that starts feeling less like peace and more like proof. Proof that something was fading while you were still calling it temporary. Proof that the heart can leave a place long before the body does. Proof that what we postpone emotionally does not wait for us forever. And maybe that is the part that lingers after everything else, the unbearable normality of it. The fact that the final moment often does not look final when you are inside it. You are answering emails, reheating coffee, saying, later, with no idea that later is already closing its hand around the hour you are standing in. You do not hear the door shutting. Not really. You only hear the echo once the room has already changed. So if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Do not wait for disaster to become honest. Do not wait for distance to become visible before you call it distance. Do not wait until someone goes quiet to ask what they have been carrying alone. And do not keep offering, later, to the people who have been loving you in real time. Because the deepest losses are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are measured in conversations you kept delaying. In warmth you kept assuming. In tenderness you thought would still be there when you finally felt ready. If this story touched something in you, something unfinished, something familiar, share it with someone who may need these words tonight. Leave a comment with the sentence you wish someone had told you sooner. Like this video if you've ever learned too late that silence can mean more than anger. And subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast if you want stories that stay with you after the screen goes dark. Because some emotions do not need noise to change your life. They only need one quiet moment, where you finally stop looking away.